Good morning. My name is Scott Lee, and I am an alcoholic. If you would, I'd like to open the session with a few moments of silence. Amen. So we've completed the third step prayer. And just come up off of our knees, and I like to tell the new guy that you're going to hear the discussion rage in the fellowship when to do a four-step. You'll hear people say, don't do a four-step too soon, you may drink. I've never seen that. I've seen a few 100,000 way too late. Or you'll hear them say, do one step a year, but they're not going to be able to tell you what page that's on, or they haven't been able to tell me anyway. I mean, you wouldn't want to get well too soon. And you got this all big bugaboo. The fourth step is, there are no surprises. You're the one that did all of this. I think it's important to have a sponsor. It was for me, because if I don't have a sponsor on this, I will do a searchless and fearing moral inventory, not knowing what that is. And I'm asked sometimes what I think about writing the story of your life. I think it's a great idea. Hope you do a four-step also. I think you'll find the four-step will change your life. I'm not sure the autobiography will. I know that the actual four-step will. So I say the book does not tell us when to do a four-step. It makes two time references. And I give all the leeway that the big book does. So as far as I'm concerned, you can use either of the two time references the book uses or anything that lies between. Does that seem fair to everybody? Okay. So I ask him to read. We begin at the bottom of page 63. It says, next. I say, whoa, time out. That is a time reference. Next. So that's like we're just coming off our knees. Next. We launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which was personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Our decision was a vital, from the Latin vita meaning life. Vital means necessary to life. Vital and crucial step may have little permanent effect unless at once. Wait a minute, that's a time reference. At once. So the fourth step is either done next, or at once, or anywhere in between. I give them all the leeway the book gives. Followed by the strenuous efforts to face and be rid. Isn't that interesting? Be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. And if I'm going to do that at step 4, if all I do in step 4 is write, I will be rid of ink, paper, and time. And none of those are blocking me. So it must be that there are things other than writing involved in step 4, since none of those will help remove what's blocking me. It is those other things that are life-changing in step 4. Now, although there is writing involved in step 4, it has, in my opinion and experience, very little therapeutic effect. It is the observations and prayers that are life-changing. Observation meaning not what I notice as I go zipping along writing, but what it tells me specifically to look for. We're going to talk about that in detail probably over the next 2 hours. To be rid of the things in ourselves that have been blocking us. Skipping down to the next paragraph. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Most of the businesses that I've ever dealt with do a computer inventory every night. That's the evening portion of step 11. Step 10 being about being present in my own life moment by moment. Evening portion 11, a rather formal inventory at night, is the last thing. But once a year, these businesses do a full tear-down inventory. Sometimes it's more than once a year, but it's always at least once a year. That's the reference. That's what I do. I discovered resentments that were over 25 years old on my 8th four-step, sober somewhere around 10 years. I know I've got some very good friends who have great programs, in my opinion, who believe you do the first 9 once and stay sober in the last 3. That's fine if that's what they want to do. The evidence in my life is I continue to find things with this annual house cleaning. And at 24 years, I think I've done 22 of these. I've missed a couple of times. Commercial inventory is fact-finding, fact-facing process, an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods to get rid of. Get rid of is so important they told us twice on this page. Get rid of them promptly. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. There's the good news again. I'm the problem. Being convinced itself, manifest in various ways, was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. As I understand step 4 out of the basic text, the 3 manifestations of self we are going to inventory are resentment, fear, and sexual misconduct. I claim that there is not a sex inventory in this book. I don't see where we inventory the bright side. I don't find the direction that says, at this point, write down all the things in the sexual arena that you did were right and good. So we inventory only the dark side, and I don't like the idea of sex having a bad name. My favorite toy. I mean, come on. So now what we're going to do is, here I am with my new guy again, searching for directions on how to do step 4. And we're going to find about 26 of them, and we're going to do them one at a time. That's the next couple hours. Resentment's the number one offender. Number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. We just threatened your life. We're going to do it a lot. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. We've been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual maladies overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. It makes me think the spiritual one's the most important one. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. That's a general description. They're going to tell me exactly now how to set them on paper. It says we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we are angry. We need a list. And we don't need to know what the second direction is till we finish the first one. A list is a series of words and phrases that run down a page. I don't think I've ever seen a list that ran across the page. Lists run down the page. And now we need a list of everything and everyone you have ever been angry with. Ever. Erase the word resentment from your mind. You don't know what it means in your case. What we're looking for is a list of people, institutions, or principles, that is to say anything, with whom we were, that's any time in the past, angry. That's what I need, is a list now. And I say, now you're probably wondering what color paper you should use, what color ink. Were you wondering that? Some of them say, yeah. The book's not specific about that. On page 67, about 10 lines from the bottom, it says we placed them before us in black and white. That's not very specific. That doesn't say black ink and white paper. Clearly that could be black paper and white ink. I'm willing to go either way with you on that. And I think and I've had so far 2 guys go to the art store, they buy an inch thick of black paper, 2 pens are right with white ink. I'm good with that. Bob thinks this is ridiculous. I agree with him. This is asinine, and I absolutely require it. I don't want to let myself off the hook on any of this. Because the little bitty thing I say, I don't really have to do that, might have been the one that would have saved my life. So if I sponsor you, do your inventory with black pen or pencil on white paper, or black paper and white ink. I'm good either way. And let's talk a little bit about what that looks like and when we're going to do it. The easy way, I think, is to get a spiral notebook. On the first page of it, I'd like you to write something subtle, like, this is my 4th step, put it down. If I find you with it, I will kill you and hide your body. Something subtle and yet that conveys the message. And then the next page is, for me, it's actually a double page. The way I do this is 4 columns. And so we open to a double page, write the number 1 above the margin on the left-hand page, a 2 around over the middle of the left-hand page, the 3 and the 4 split the right-hand page. And now I need a list. And the list is made up of everybody and everything you can think of that's ever made you mad, ever. So let's start the first. Write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. When you get to the bottom of the page, you have to turn the page. You can't write on the right-hand page. We're going to need that. Write 1, 2, 3, 4, and just keep them coming. Just keep them coming. Now, for those of you who cheated and looked ahead and know that the next direction has to do with what they did, and you're planning to leave 10 pages for your father, the answer to the question is write 1 name and skip 1 line, and don't list anybody more than once. We're going to talk about why in a couple of minutes. I think it's just critically important. Let's talk about when. There are 168 hours in a week. If you have a 40-hour week job and a 30-minute commute each way, that's 45 hours gone. 8 hours a night of sleep is 56 more. I want you to spend about 15 hours a week on meetings. That's a little travel time, a little hangout before, a little hangout after. 3 hours a week on recreation, a round of golf, play some tennis, something like that. 2 hours to mow the lawn, do your melon list. They get the melon list up here? Honey, do this, honey, do that, the melon list. 5 hours a week reading spiritual literature. I require of myself and the men I sponsor to read 2 pages a day in the big book. We start at Roman numeral 11, go through 164. I read my 2 this morning. You can't find all the new stuff if you don't stay current in the book, okay? And there's not new stuff, but I read it with new eyes. Is what happens. Some other spiritual literature. 3 hours a week to bathe, shave. 4 hours for a date with your wife if you're fortunate enough to still be in the house. If not, maybe you can coach a little league team. Do something in the plus column. 5 hours on the telephone with me and some men whose names and numbers I will give you. I will pick them for you. 12 hours a week to cook and eat food. 1 hour to shop for groceries, clothes, get a haircut. 5 hours in prayer and meditation. 9 hours watching TV. That's 3 ball games. That's enough. That's 165 hours gone out of a 168-hour week. You got 3 hours left. I want half. It varies. I need to know about his life. I sponsor a guy when I got to this part. His wife had a fabulous job, and he's a stay-at-home dad with a 1-year-old 5 days a week. And the kid sleeps from 1 till 3 in the afternoon for a nap every day. He's got 5 days where he's sitting there by himself in the house with a 1-year-old for 2 hours. For him, 10 hours a week. Let's negotiate it. And I want you to call me every Sunday, and I want the schedule. And Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is not a schedule. Monday from 9 o'clock p.m. till 9:30 p.m. is a schedule. I want it scheduled. Time and date. Like anything else on my schedule, it's subject to change. It's not subject to cancellation. I had it scheduled Saturday afternoon at 2. I didn't know the kid had a Little League game. I went to the Little League game, and I slipped it till 7 o'clock that night. I don't even need a phone call on that. What I need to know, when I started to do my first one, I gave myself the assignment of completing a step 4. It put me in perfect position to hate myself till it was done because I hadn't completed the assignment. When my sponsor and I can agree on how much time and when I should work on this 4-step each week, and I do that each week, I can feel good about myself because I'm in process. And I will always be in process somehow. I think for me it's a better mindset. I also like to tell him that we are not saving a special alcove in Akron at the AA Hall of Fame for your 4-step. Right? You will have my permission to do a poor 4-step. That anything worth doing is worth doing poorly as you learn to do it. You're not going to get this perfect. I don't expect you to. You have my permission not to. As a matter of fact, to be completely honest with you, our home group does not give a trophy every year for the best 4-step. This is the trophy you are not going to get. For those too far back, it says 4-step trophy never awarded. This is the trophy you ain't getting. And you can have your photo made with this for a very small price here at the break. This is all about a mindset of you don't have to do it perfectly. Because if I have to do it perfectly, I can't do it at all. It's not permission to screw up on purpose. It's permission to be human. And then we sit down and write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. When you get to the bottom of the page, turn the page and just keep them coming. When they slow down, when you can sit for 15 or 20 seconds and not think of anyone or anything, then we'll move on to direction 2. In the meantime, some of them you'll be unsure of. The rule is when in doubt, write it out. Better to put it down and discover later it isn't actually a problem than to not write it down and later have it kill you. Let's see now. Not a problem later, a little ink, a little time, or kill me. So let's pick by what the penalty is going to be. So when in doubt, write it out. When you get to the end and can't think of any more, there's a direction at the bottom of page 65 says we went back through our lives. So that indicates that I use a reverse chronology. I like the idea of just download, just dump them first. But then let's go back through my life. Now, I live here. I'm married to Miss Linda, the most fabulous woman on the planet. I work for these people. This is where my home is, my church, my home group. This is what my life looks like. So I searched that for things that have ever made me angry. But 16 years ago, I was married to, and I worked for those other guys, and I lived in this other place and so on. And then before that, I lived in this other town, and before that, I was in the Air Force, and I was stationed at this place. And I go back through my life prayerfully. I want this 30-minute session that you're going to do to start with 5 minutes of prayer and meditation. Ask God for clarity of mind to find what He'd have you find and the courage to write it down and anything else you want to do. But I want you to open with 5 minutes of prayer and then 25 minutes of writing. And we can negotiate that. I sponsor a guy right now who's coming up on 2 years in a couple of days. And when we got to this, he's one of these get up at 5 o'clock in the morning thing because he's always awake. And he wants to work on it for an hour each morning, 5 days a week. Great. As long as we can agree on it. And all of a sudden your boss is coming into town for a whole week and you're going to start with breakfast and run through dinner and 9:30 at night. Can't work on your 4-step this week? I agree on the front end. I agree when you tell me on Sunday that you have a reason that you can't work on it this week. I get reasons on the front end. I get excuses on the back end. Bring me the reason up front, I'm easy. Bring me the excuse later, you don't want to see it. That's how I do it. When we get to your earliest memory, we are finished with the first column. Is it complete? No. No chance at all. No chance. But we're through with it for now. At this point, I want you to carry writing materials with you all the time because you're going to be walking through the grocery store. You're going to look down at the cantaloupe and say, here's the look. He said, just write it down. Just write it down. We'll add it to the list. We got plenty of room. Now we search. Having done the first column, completed, now we search for direction 2. Cleverly concealed in the book in the next sentence. We asked ourselves why we were angry. We take a look at the example on the facing page. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. Under the cause, it says, I'm on page 65. His attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office. If you would, begin with the word office and count backwards, just the words under the cause. Can somebody give me a number, how many words that is? $19, yeah. It's easy to miss of and the. That's what go backwards sometimes. 19 words. Let's look at what this Brown fella did. He's messing with his wife. Has told his wife about his girlfriend. I bet that was fun. That's got to have been a great day. And, by the way, trying to get him fired. He got 19 words. 19 words. That's still a misdemeanor. And so, column 2, you have, if you're doing it this way, at column 2, you've got from the margin over to the spiral and the entire line below it on which you can write 19 words or fewer. 19 words or fewer, it's a summary, right? It doesn't start out saying it was a rainy Wednesday afternoon. No. I got a phone call years ago on a Sunday evening from a girl in my home group. She says, I'm just crazy. I said, what's the matter? She said, my boss and I had a big fight on Friday, and I've been four-stepping about it all weekend. No, she hadn't. She'd been taking his inventory, hating him on paper. That's not what this is about. This is a summary. My second column reads like this. Left me for another guy. Screwed me in a business deal. Left me for another guy. Next, a high school football coach. Didn't play me as much as I deserved. Left me for another guy. There are patterns. Right, but it's brief. Next, my father beat me down so hard that at 65 years old, I still have problems with authority figures. I have trouble telling people things they don't want to hear. 19 words or less. If I sponsor you, I'll tell you don't write the 20th word. If you've got somebody that's done more than this to you, call me and we'll negotiate whether you can write the 20th word. I'll be glad to talk about it. I'll tell you I've never given it up. I'm willing to talk about it. Truth is, I've never been called. You wouldn't call me after this, would you? No, they don't either. So we work down the page. The hardest thing, I used to give these first 3 directions together, and then they work across the page. There are 2 very good reasons to work down the page. The first one is the book said a list run down the page. The second one is if you work across the page, if you write the name and what they did and then what it affected, it tends to make the resentment flare. And we're not trying to make it flare. We're trying to excise it. We're going to dig this baby out of here. That's what we're here for. That's what's going to happen in step 4. Bottom of column 2, we now look for the third direction at the top of page 65 on our grudge list. We said opposite each name, our injuries, was it our? Self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal or sex relations. 5-part multiple choice. Some will only get 1, some will get 2 or 3, some may get all 5. Some you may not be able to figure out. Call your sponsor and they'll help you see why it was self-esteem. Because on the first one, they all will be. My last 2 inventories, security has gotten the most ink. It's been a real change for me, and they haven't taken long. For me, the most powerful part of step 4 is the actions between the 3rd and 4th columns. That is where the rubber meets the road. And bottom of the page, nothing counted but thoroughness is honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. These are some observations that I was referring to. We're going to consider it carefully. They're going to tell us how. First thing apparent was the world of people were often quite wrong. I don't let them spend much time on that. The chances are you have spent the last 10 to 20 years on bar stools with some of the other great philosophers of our era covering this exact subject. So we don't need to give this a lot of time, all right? To keep it moving, the next paragraph, it's plain that a life that includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. Is that plain to you? Do you see that? Have you ever seen a life that was happy, joyous, free, and full of deep resentment? It's a combination that does not occur. So this is an indictment of resentment. This is the second one. To the precise extent we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? Squander means to throw away with no help of getting anything positive back. Did you ever sit in class and hate them when you should have been listening? Did you ever lay awake at night and plan their demise and what you're going to do to them instead of sleeping? Did you squander hours that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic whose hope, and we're going to tell you what your hope is. The maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. Growth means that what I've already got may be insufficient for next year. I must remain in the growth mode. I believe maintenance means two things. Maintenance means I must maintain. I can't backslide at all. It also means I must maintenance my spiritual experience in the same sense that I maintenance my vehicle. I rotate the tires. I keep the right pressure in them. I change the oil. I wash it. I maintenance my spiritual condition. I pray. I meditate. I put your blinker on near me in traffic. I'll let you in. That's a very spiritual thing for me. I attend a lot of meetings. I have the high honor and privilege of taking meetings into treatment centers and jails. I'm faithful to my wife. I'm trying to be a good father. I'm a fabulous grandfather. You know, I'm doing those things to maintenance my spiritual condition. So my hope is the maintenance and growth of my spiritual experience. It says this business of resentment is infinitely grave. Infinitely grave. I think we just threatened your life. I think we're going to do it 7 times on this page. For when harboring such feelings, not so much when having such feelings. When harbor means to give a safe place to nurture. I'm okay if I have a resentment. I'm not okay if I'm harboring it. And the directions for not harboring are coming at the bottom of this page. We shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. We drink again. Well, that's to drink is to die. We just killed you again. That's 2. If we were to live, this is only for the ones that want to live. Everybody else can go on to lunch. If we were to live, we just killed you again. That's 3. We had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for us. Very confused by that when I first read it. I got a piece of information. About the time this book was being written, one of the most creative men that ever lived, named Walt Disney, would sit his team around a table, and they would spit out ideas for Mickey Mouse cartoons. And you say something that reminded her of something, she thinks something reminded him, and I think of something, and there it would be. And he named his process brainstorming. Has absolutely nothing to do with the word brainstorm as you see it written in the text. Bob and I have both dug into dictionaries from the 1930s and earlier. And brainstorm, the one I looked up said brainstorm meant transient, violent mental outburst. That's rage. That is rage. Has nothing to do with the creative process. So if we look at what it's really telling us here, there are 2 kinds of anger. The grouch or the slow burn, the brainstorm or rage. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be, is this thin? They may be the dubious luxury for normal men, but for alcoholics these things are, we killed you again. We turned back to the list for it held the key to the future. Now this is a subtle death. Does that mean if I don't find the key to the future, I don't have a future? Yes, that's what that means. Found the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Entirely different from what? Well, the last time we looked at the list was at the bottom of the preceding page where it said the first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. We have been looking at where they were wrong right up until now. And now I must prepare myself to look at it from an entirely different angle. You want to take it from there for a while?
Okay. I'm Bob, an alcoholic. Some guys and gals, I think guys more so, have difficulty identifying resentments. The ego doesn't want to admit that anyone could hurt us, right? Sometimes the ego is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's clever. And if it reads ahead, so it knows amends are coming, right? So, no, I don't resent those people because you kind of you get it, no. If that's a resentment, that might cost me money. No, that's not resentment. So, some of us have a hard time identifying this. Years ago, I had a guy ask me to sponsor him who was sober, actually a year longer than I was. I was probably 22 years sober at the time. He was 23, and he was 23 years sober with the benefit of step none, and he was going to kill himself with 23 years of sobriety. and which was perfectly all right for him. He was glad to kill himself. The problem, and the reason he came to me, is that if he was going to die, the obsession to drink returned. He figured, if I'm going to kill myself, I might as well do it drunk. And the idea of him dying and everyone knew that he didn't have 23 years of sobriety made him crazy. He didn't mind dying. He just didn't want to look like he was wrong after he's dead, right? Right? His ego actually saved his life. And his ego brought him to the table, and we started going through the steps. And we just finished the third step on his knees, and we started telling him about the fourth step. I said, I want you to make a list of your resentments. Well, he's kind of a blustery guy, uptight, blustery, ex-Navy chief. One of those kind of guys that always talks to you with his arms like this. And I said, I want you to make a list of your resentments. And he says, resentments? I don't have any resentments. I said, really? He says, yeah, I just let that stuff go. Nothing bothers me. Well, you could watch this guy walk across a parking lot from 100 yards and know he's pissed about something. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right. But he doesn't think he has a resentment. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, Jerry, I said, in your case, we're going to do something different. I want you to make a list of people you feel smugly superior to. And he got this look on his face like, oh, that's going to be a long list. Because what in resentments, it's impossible to have a resentment without a judgment. And this is where I start to put down the manifestations of self, the ego, that part of me that climbs up on the throne of judgment and starts making the judgments. This is how I play God. So I'm looking at the resentments, and then an interesting thing on page 65. There is. Now, I know people that all they've done is the first three columns. And if that's all you do, you'll get sicker. Because the real work and the magic, the transformation, really comes on the following two pages, 66 and 67. But there is 2 points of value that come from the first three columns. One point of value is that you separate the person from their actions. It's not really the person I hate, it's what happened in column number 2 is what I really hate. The second thing is that I start to realize that there is self-centered fear in every single resentment because something was threatened. Was it my sex relationships were threatened? My self-esteem, my pride, my ambitions, my pocketbook, it's impossible to have a resentment without some sort of fear being involved. Okay? And then on page 66, this is the page in 67 that changed my life. So dramatically that I tell you, I didn't know that at 4 years sober, doing a thorough job on this, I didn't understand that I was building a weapon that I would use against self when it became militant again and rose up in my life at 11 years sober when I found out my wife had been sleeping with my best friend, one of my sponsees, for the whole last year of my marriage. And I, in one sweep, lost my daughter, my best friend, and my wife in one sweep. And my ego had been set waiting, almost like the military-industrial complex, waiting for making weapons, waiting for an opportunity to go to war. And my ego had been waiting all this time. And if I hadn't have done this work, I would have died at that point. I would have died. I didn't know that I was building a weapon that would protect me from really the only problem I've ever had, which is me. It would defend me against me. And one of the things that Scott commented on this is such a... these resentments, these judgments shut us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. You can't play God and serve God at the same time. They're mutually exclusive positions. So when I'm judging God's kids and playing God, there's no God in my life because I've taken His. I'm it. I'm the great I am, right? And so I'm shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And alcoholics, this spiritual malady is that I get a sick, disconnected, isolated, depressed spirit that eventually thirsts for relief. And if I don't find a way to free that and change that, I'm doomed. And this is really where it starts. The line in here that Scott commented on, it says, we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. Well, what does that mean? Okay, so far, how have I been looking at it? What's the first three columns? Isn't it, in essence, I'm taking the stance of a prosecuting attorney? This is my case. That I've built against these people. Here, the name, what they did, and what was hurt, threatened, affected, interfered with, or injured, that's my case. So if I was going to look at it from an entirely different angle, wouldn't it mean that I would cross the courtroom and I would sit on the defense table and now I would start talking about it and explaining it and looking at it from their point of view? Now, if you start to do that, I'll tell you one thing. It's going to look different. It's going to look different. Now, the ego doesn't want to do that because the minute you start to cross that courtroom, the ego balks because the ego, all it wants is to be right. Matter of fact, my ego is so strong that it doesn't care if it kills me as long as after I'm dead, everyone knows I was right. But this being prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle is a supposition. And the supposition is that by this time I am surrendered enough, I'm convinced enough of my absolute need to do this, that I'm willing to entertain a great thing that possibly I could have been wrong about all these people. Am I prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle? And then it says something I think is it implies it could be this way, but I found it in every case to some degree. It says the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. Fancied. I discovered that in every single resentment, there's something fancied about it because it is a self-serving judgment. It serves the ego. It serves that part of you that wants to be superior, that part of you that wants to be right. It's self-serving. And I'll tell you it's something that happened to me that really set me up to be able to do this. When I was about I was fairly new. And I went out to coffee one night with a guy named Billy Taylor. And Billy was a very active member of AA, went to a lot of meetings. And he was an easy guy to talk to. And he was always like sitting in coffee shops with new guys talking about AA. And I got a lot of my Alcoholics Anonymous in the early days in coffee shops, before and after meetings. And I'm sitting one night, late at night, with Billy, and I found myself, because he was easy to talk to, telling him a few of the things about myself that I was the most ashamed of. And, over the years, I found every alcoholic has those things. It's different in individuals, but we all have those things that we'd like to take to the grave, the things that, when we think about, we shudder, that create remorse. And it's different. Maybe for some of you, you went out and partied and got drunk and you forgot about your kids and you left them all alone at home and you shudder to think what could have happened. Or maybe in a drunken rage you beat your kids. Or maybe when you were hungover. Or maybe you had a dog that loved you and one day it came up to lick your face and you hated yourself so much you beat the dog. Or maybe you dimed out a friend in order to save your own butt. Or maybe you let somebody else lose their job because you did something and you let them think that someone else did it. Or maybe you had sex with someone you wouldn't even want anybody to know you'd have lunch with that person. Right? Maybe you had sex outside your species, for God's sakes. I don't know. I don't know what your deal was. I just know you have a deal. Everybody has a deal, right? Everybody has a deal. And I had a bunch of deals, and I told Billy some of my deals, and he took it okay, I suppose. You know what, that bothered me? He didn't say, it would have been better if he would have said, oh, me too. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, he said, well, I'm sure you're not the only one that's ever done that. Someday that'll be useful to help someone else. Kind of, I remember thinking in the back of my mind, it's a little AA party line kind of statement. But he didn't reject me. He seemed to take it well. I went home that night, went to work. That week, my shift got changed. Instead of working 8 to 4, I started working 4 to midnight. Well, for a good part of a year, my whole meeting schedule just went upside down, completely changed. I started going to noon meetings instead of night meetings. And consequently, I didn't see Billy for a long time. A good part of a year later, I go to a meeting at night on my night off that I normally wouldn't go to. And as I walk into the meeting hall, I see Billy across the hall. And I was glad to see him. You know how you get with people that were part of your early sobriety that you hadn't seen in a good time. You know, you see him and it kind of lights you up. It's the bright spot. I saw Billy and I said, hey, man, Billy, good to see you. And he wouldn't say hi to me. As a matter of fact, he looked at me with a look of like pained contempt and then just turned away and wouldn't look at me anymore and sat down. And the meeting started, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know what's going on in the meeting, but I'll tell you, inside of me, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And I'm sitting there, and I'm hurt, and I know what's going on. I know that SOB has been judging me for that stuff. And I'll tell you something, there's a part of me that doesn't blame him. God knows I have judged myself harshly enough for that stuff. And I always secretly believed that if you knew about me, what I know about me, you'll feel about me the way I feel about me, and that's not good. And I was sat there and I'm hurt, and when I'm hurt, I'm angry. It's an automatic knee-jerk reaction to me. I start getting angry. I start building my case against him. It's my defense. And I'm sitting there thinking about what a hypocrite he is and all that crap. And he tries to pretend like he's such a good AA member. And then I had this epiphany. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was like it came so clear to me all of a sudden that SOB, the reason he can't look me in the eye, he's been telling people that stuff. And all of a sudden, all the dots connected. There was a gal, I had just asked her out. She would not go out with me, and she's friends with him. I knew he told her that stuff. There was another guy that he runs around with that had been a little distant from me. I knew he had told him. Now I am enraged. I am going to kill him. And feel justified, because if he's doing that to me, he's probably doing it to other new people. And I am cocked and ready, and as soon as the meeting's over, I'm going to tear into this guy. And the chairperson is ending the meeting and says, before we close, does anybody have a burning desire? And Billy raises his hand. He tells everybody in the room that the tumor, they found out the biopsy came back and it was malignant, and he had a very short time to live. And I sat there and I felt about this big, because I awoke to the reality that what I saw in Billy's face had nothing to do with me. I awoke to the reality that on the day he found out he was terminally ill and had a very short time to live, that saying hi to Bob, or even realizing Bob was there, was not even on the horizon. That he probably was so afraid and up in his head as I would be, that he didn't even know I was there. And the look on his face had nothing to do with me. It was all about what was going on with him. And it was like a postcard from God. Dear Bob, you don't know crap. Love, God. Now, I'll tell you why this was important, and I had a couple other instances like that, is because the book is going to ask me to do something. And if you can't really get how deadly wrong you can be in your judgments, because if I could be that wrong about Billy Taylor, could it be possible? Could it be possible that I could have been that wrong in my perception of my mother and father, and my sister, and my lovers, and my bosses, and my running partners, and the police? Could I have been that wrong, or does my ego refuse to look at it differently? I was finally prepared to look at these things from an entirely different angle. And the book says, it talks about, Scott covered all the death threats on page 66. It tells you pretty much it's going to kill you if you don't get free of this stuff. And then here's the kicker. Here's the thing that after it spends a whole page telling you, oh, stuff's going to kill you, and then it goes, oh, by the way. you can't do anything about it. These resentments must be mastered, but we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So the knowledge that they're going to kill me and the desire not to have them isn't enough. And some of you know that. You ever have a deep-seated resentment in sobriety? You say, okay, I'm not going to have that again.
No.
It's like, all right, I'm not going to think about that ever again. How do you stop? When I was 2 days after my divorce from my first wife, and I found out that my daughter and my best friend and wife were living together, and I'd go to meetings and I'd be insane, and people would say, I'd talk about it in the meeting, they'd say, hey, just don't think about it. Whoa. I think I would need surgery to do that. You'd have to be cutting out parts of my frontal lobe, man, because I can't stop thinking about that. I couldn't wish it away any more than alcohol, and I knew it was killing me. I knew it. I knew it. So what did I do? I did what I did earlier in my sobriety in this 4-step. It says this was our course. It's asking me to realize something, and I got to connect really and truly and bring into reality a view of things that's different than anything I've had so far. I have to realize and make something real. And what it's asking me to realize and make real is the fact that the person who wronged me was perhaps spiritually sick. Now, that's not so hard. I get, they're sick and they're idiots too. But here's the kicker. Here's what turned me around. It says, though I did not like their symptoms, column 2, what they did to me, though I did not like their symptoms, and the way their symptoms hurt or disturbed me, that I had to realize that they were like me, perhaps spiritually sick. This is not spiritually sick of a well person feeling sorry and looking down on a sick person. This is a sick person looking at another sick person and getting that guy's driven by the same fears and insecurities and frustrations and misses the mark in life just like I do. And really getting that. And if you get that, all of a sudden, if you really get that, forgiveness is automatic, because by getting that, you're giving to the person the same consideration and slack you would like that person to give you when you really screwed up. And I know there's some people like me in this room that have really screwed up, and people got hurt as a result of it. Yeah. So consequently, I have to, when I forgive, is I give to you the same consideration and other-centeredness that I would want you to give to me if the tables were turned. Right? Can my ego come off of me enough to do that? To realize this. And when I started to do this, and I went through my whole life and did that, my God, how wrong I'd been. And when I started looking at people like this, something happened to me, and I think it's a byproduct of this, is I started to have compassion for them. And compassion is 2 words, com meaning with, and passion, passio, meaning pain, is that I started to all of a sudden be able to sit with the pain that drove them to do the things that hurt me, and consequently, when I got it, I realized the price they paid. You know why? Because it would be the same exact price I would pay if I'd done to someone what they'd done to me. And then all of a sudden, I could see myself in these people. And the illusion of separation that the ego creates, you know that thing that I didn't, you know how you pump yourself, I didn't never done that, as if you're superior. All of a sudden, and that ain't holding water, because that's me. That maybe is me with the worst childhood. That maybe is me if I'd been hurt or abused a little more than I had been. It's maybe me if I was really, really afraid with the right amount of emotions and drugs and alcohol in play at the same time. But I start to see through the sickness and see myself and get that if I was in the exact same shoes they were in, I would have had the exact same response and probably done the exact same thing, and then consequently probably would have secretly and covered it up, hated myself for doing it, and I started to realize, oh my God, look what they reaped. And I started to see them differently than I ever seen them. About 18 years ago or so, give or take a couple years, I was going through a fifth step with a guy I was sponsoring, and he had buried his worst resentment probably 2/3 or half, into the middle of his fourth step in the resentment list. And we're going through this, and we get to this resentment. It's towards his father, and he came from an awful, hideous alcoholic home, and he grew up in a household where he was beaten physically to the point where he ended up in the hospital on several occasions, and he'd have to tell lies about how he fell out of a tree, or he did, all to cover up all this stuff, and it was horrible. And I'm not talking about one or two instances. I'm talking about a lifetime of horror. And then on a couple occasions, his father's drinking would get so bad that he'd be forced for short periods of time into a state of abstinence. You know how we get beaten down by alcohol and we swear to ourselves we'll never drink. But what happened is Dad would become so irritable when he was sober that it was almost worse, because now he would yell and scream and shut up and get to your room and you're stupid. And this went on and on. It was a nightmare. He could not bring kids home because of the monster. He had to create a whole fantasy life that he would tell the people in school because he didn't want anybody to know. He was so conflicted because even though in the horror of it, there was a part of him that loved his father and was ashamed of the whole thing. And it destroyed. There were a few instances where we suspected his dad may, for a brief period of time, gone to AA or maybe a church or something, because there were two little places he could remember where his dad actually stopped drinking and had a change of heart, briefly, where he'd make the promises, I'm going to get you a bicycle, I'm going to take you to Disneyland, but he'd go back to drinking, and it seemed like the rages and the drunkenness and the beatings would be worse after a period of abstinence. And this is a resentment that owned this guy. This guy had spent 8 years in therapy trying to get free of it and never budged. He had done all the Gestalt stuff, the beating the pillows, the Gestalt chair. He'd done all of that. He had thought it through. He had done everything. He could not be free of it. It owned him. It affected his relationship with women. It affected his ability to be a team player in any job. He ended up being forced to have little businesses that he'd run for a while, and they'd fail, and he'd get another one because he had a hard time with authority. And here we are. We're in the middle of this fifth step, and he's talking about all this stuff. And I read him a little passage out of the 12 by 12 where Bill expands on the principle, and this was our course. And he says that as we approach true tolerance and see what real love actually means, it'll become more and more evident as we go on that other people like ourselves are frequently wrong and emotionally ill. And we start to see that it's pointless to become angry at people like ourselves who are suffering from the pains of growing up. And then we got to this was our course, and I said to him, you have to realize that somehow inside of you, you're like your father. And he flipped out. He got pissed at me, and he started yelling at me, and he scared me. He started this ventilating all this rage, and man, I was afraid he was going to hit me or something, man. I was like, and I'm sitting there, and he's going off, and I'm thinking to myself, well, he's not prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle, I guess. I don't know what to do, I'm stuck here. And he runs out of gas ventilating all this stuff, and he's glaring at me. And I don't know what to tell him, so I just said, just go on. And he starts reading another resentment, and I can't hear him. Because I said a prayer as I always do, when I listen to a fifth step, I ask God to make me useful. Mm-hmm. And something started happening inside of me. It was like a stone in my shoe, and I couldn't get away from it. Consequently, I can't hear him anymore. And I stopped him. I said, I'm sorry, but I need to go back to another resentment. He said, you want to talk more about my damn father? I said, no. Back at the beginning. That woman that you had the resentment for because she dumped you? Yeah, what of it? I said, there were kids in that relationship. You were together for a while, right? He said, yeah, what of it? I said, I just all of a sudden was wondering if in that relationship, if there had ever been a time when you were drunk or stoned on drugs or hungover where you might have ever done anything to hurt those kids. And he put his head down. And I don't know what's going on. And when he lifts his head up, he's got a tear running down just one side of his face. And he says, in this horrible whisper, he said, I'm just like my goddamn father. And I said to him, I said, how did you feel about yourself when you hurt those kids? He said, I couldn't stay drunk enough. I said, do you think your dad might be like that? And he said, you know, my dad's never been able to get sober. He said, there's only one person that ever talks to him anymore. Nobody in the family has anything to do with him. It's his one sister. And his sister will go over. He lives, and he said, my sister told me he lives in this pitiful little trailer out in the middle of California in a little nowhere town in a trailer park. He lives all by himself. He's got pancreatitis and liver damage to the point where his body will not metabolize alcohol. So his body has forced him into a state of abstinence. And his sister said he's the most miserable, depressed, negative, lonely person she's ever known. And I said, do you think you could be like that? And he said, you know, without Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe that would be a vision of my future. And for the first time in his whole life, he could see himself in his father. And he looked at his dad from an entirely different angle. And we started going through the last part of this in the middle of page 67 is where we start stepping up. And the first thing it says, and it says it twice in the same paragraph because it's so important, it says, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. We're not looking for our part. Matter of fact, if you're saying that, you're doing the people you sponsor a disservice when you say we're going to look for our part. And I'll tell you why. There's an unconscious implication. First of all, it doesn't say that in the book. That's a good reason right there. But I'll tell you the baggage that comes with looking for your part. There's an unconscious implication that if I'm going to look for my part, there's another part. And whose part do you think would be bigger? All right. The book says we're not looking for parts. It says disregard the other person involved entirely. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. In other words, I can't hide my own selfish behavior in the shadow of what they did that was sick and wrong. And I think most alcoholics were masters of that. Matter of fact, I think it's one of the reasons I've been so judgmental in my life. I want to get stuff on you so I can. If I worked for you and you're my boss and I caught you taking some product home, that was a license to steal. Right? I looked for what was wrong with you to justify myself. Now the book's asking me not to do that anymore. I have to stand up and be a man. I can't use what you did as an excuse for anything I've been or done. And so he started looking at what kind of a son he had. What if he looked at it in the light of forgetting his father was sick and did all that weird stuff in the beating? What if he had the perfect father? What if he just had to look at what kind of son he was, period? And what he realized, he was a terrible son. He used his father's sickness as an excuse to borrow thousands and thousands of dollars off his dad, never paid a dime back because he's an asshole and I don't have to. He used that as an excuse to pump himself up and look like he was so great to all the rest of the family. He turned everybody in the family against his father except for the one sister who kept going over there. And he thought, oh my God, what have I done to a sick man like that? And he went to make amends because one of the last things it says here, it says, we placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. He's going to the trailer park and he calls me from outside the park and he's scared and he says, I'm just afraid of the monster. He hadn't seen his dad in years and years. I said, we talked a little bit, and I said, call me as soon as you're done. And he called me later, and he said, what? I said, what happened? He says, I went to the door, and I knocked on the door. I was shaking inside. And the monster didn't answer the door. It was this little old man who was depressed and alone and hopeless and scared. And he saw a look in his father's eyes of guilt and remorse and shame and depression. And he looked in his father's eyes and he saw himself. And he made amends to his father, and he made the decision that he was going to be the best, absolute best son this planet has ever seen. And he went over and started taking care of his dad. Took care of his dad until his dad died. And he'd tell you to this day, many years later, that the greatest thing Alcoholics Anonymous had given him next to his sobriety is he got his daddy back. One of the things that happens when you push the ego aside, the therapists will tell you, well, you can't change your childhood. I'll tell you something. Since I've been sober and done this work, I got a different childhood than I had. The one I thought I had was not real. It was a selfish, self-centered, overly self-obsessed perception of a childhood that had imperfections in it, as everything in life does. I tried to blame my parents for everything because I didn't want to stand up. And I got my parents back, too, as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a childhood. The longer I'm sober, the better my childhood looks. Square business. I had parents that weren't perfect, but there's never been a doubt that in their own inhibited, limited way, they loved me with everything they had. With everything they had.
Let me do a couple little pieces and we'll break.
Okay, good.
Bottom of 66. One of the most powerful observations in the book, if not the most important observation, certainly one of them. We saw that these resentments must be mastered. Do you see that? Do you see that? We killed you 7 times on this page. Was that sufficient? I'm a salesman by trade. That's what Bill Wilson was. He was a peddler. And a good peddler will never mention price until he's established value. We've just killed you 7 times. All right? And the reason is because the value is very, very high. We have to establish that because the price is even higher. And then it says, we couldn't wish them away. I can't forgive you. I think the English language has the word wrong. It's not an active verb, it's a passive. And we're going to talk about that in this next section. It says, we realize that people who wrong us are perhaps spiritually sick. My mentor said he defined spiritually sick as cut off from God. I have something the angels don't have, the ability to turn my back on God and go right back to doing it my way. And that's what I was doing. I'm not going to call on anybody. Bring to mind, if you would, for a second, the 1 or 2 worst things you ever did. Got them? Weren't you spiritually sick when you did that? Had you been walking in the sunlight of the Spirit, in conscious contact with this laughing, loving, generous God? Could you have done that? Would you have thought of doing it? Probably not. You were spiritually sick when you did that. And so this is a gift from another one of my teachers. Watch my hands if you would. I have to realize that the people who wronged me were perhaps spiritually sick. I can know something, but when I realize it, it becomes real for me. And I also learn to see it with my real eyes. Not these that you can see, but the spirit eyes. So I must realize that these people, and what I do with someone at this point is I have them pray the list once. I want you to sit for 5 minutes and talk to God about the worst things you have ever done and how you crave His forgiveness. And then first name on the list, Fred. God help me realize that Fred was not an SOB. He was just sick when he did those things to me. Second name on the list, Mary. Father, please help me see that Mary's not an evil human being. She was just spiritually sick when she did those things. And I think that 5-minute setup, talking about the worst things I ever did, puts my spirit in perfect position to pray that list once. I'd like to close as we closed last night, and we'll break for lunch. If those who weren't here, if you'll remain seated, we're going to have a moment of silence in honor of those who carried this message to us that are gone. We're going to, at a fairly slow pace, by your standards anyway, we're going to whisper the Lord's Prayer. And the word amen is the last word. Please don't chant anything. We're going to have a moment of silence after that. and see if we can feel what's in this room. Let's have a couple of moments of silence in honor of those that carried this message to us that are gone. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless us all. We'll see you in a couple hours.